Welcome back to The Big Picture. We saw hours of footage on Monday evening showing the burning and looting of Baltimore neighborhoods. What we have seen significantly less of is real coverage of the peaceful aspects of the Freddie Gray protests and demonstrations. Last Monday night and Tuesday during the day, many citizens hit the streets to clean up after the unrest and to continue to demonstrate peacefully. This is not a narrative that most of the media wants to pick up, preferring to turn their cameras off as soon as the last fire is put out and the last protester is dragged off the street. We saw a similar national attitude in Ferguson. National media flocked to the suburb of St. Louis while police and protesters clashed, but the media quickly left when the demonstrators marched peacefully. If these communities are apparently invisible to the media, except when they burn, why do commentators continue to act shocked when communities erupt like we saw on Monday in Baltimore? Let's rumble. Joining me for tonight's Big Picture Rumble are Brian Pruitt, Director of Red State, Christy Setzer, Progressive Strategist and CEO of New Heights Communications, and Gianno Caldwell, Principal and Founder of Caldwell Strategic Consulting. Great to see you all tonight.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Okay, so, frequently in response to violence like we saw Monday in Baltimore, commentators are, they get all upset and they start invoking Martin Luther King and whatnot. It seems to me that there's, and I'm going to be talking about this more in the Daily Take later on, that this is not so much a riot as it is a revolt. That when, and to slightly racialize it, if I may, when white people were living under an oppressive government and got seriously PO'd about it, they marched down to Boston Harbor and threw $1 million worth of tea in the river. Nobody was calling them thugs. And then they picked up guns and started shooting. And nobody called them, gangbangers or anything. We call them patriots. So, is it time for us to consider reframing this and start talking about what the hell's really going on? What's the real history of 40 years of free trade have devastated our cities? Gianna, you're chomping at the bit here. Go for it.
You know how you and I are. But I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and my mom was addicted to crack cocaine and heroin. My childhood mirrored those of the folks in Baltimore. I realized that there are some really legitimate concerns when it comes to excessive police force, education, opportunities, but at the same time, justice does not prevail when you have folks that are doing criminal activities and not peacefully protesting. So we have to kind of change our view on it and not allow a situation.
So we're back to the H-Rap Brown debate. If the cameras will not turn on for a peaceful protest. And by the way, this isn't just about issues of race and justice. The cameras didn't turn on when 500,000 people showed up in New York City for climate. I mean, it's like, the good stuff just doesn't get covered.
It actually does. It actually does.
I want to take issue with your point because I think the media does take time to cover really good stories. Let's talk about the Mom of the Year, #Mom of the Year, an African-American woman who went and saved her son from rioting.
I see that as another racist meme by the right wing, and here's why.
With you.
Because what they're saying is, okay, here's this mom who went out and found her son out there rioting or whatever, slapped him upside the head, said go home. So we can talk about that, so we don't have to talk about the fact that black people in Baltimore are 8.5 times more likely than white people in Baltimore to be arrested for marijuana possession. 95% of all the arrests in that neighborhood are for, are African Americans. That the black unemployment rate is 2, 3, 4 times depending on where you are and what county. We don't have to talk about the police violence. We don't have to talk about the fact that the Baltimore police paid $6 million out in the last 5 years.
The national media is talking about that. It's not.
I'm telling you, the Mom of the Year shuts that whole thing down.
What you're missing here is the fact that there are peaceful protests going on, and it is being covered by the media through platforms like Facebook and Twitter.
But not
now
on
the
Fox
conversation.
News.
The conversation.
I want to get Christy in here.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that there has been somewhat of a turning point today when you saw other cities marching in solidarity. I do think that those protests have been covered. But I think one of the more disappointing aspects of this entire thing has been the bipartisan nature of, denouncing the rioters as thugs. And that has become sort of part of the vernacular from the president to the mayor of Baltimore to, you know, the
Mayor of
governor.
Baltimore apologized for using that word today. I mean,
yeah, she did. But it's been, you know, Democrats and Republicans alike who have done this. And I think that, you know, when we talk about sort of this, the coarseness of the dialogue informs the way that these things are getting covered and vice versa, right? If we're only sort of looking at the way, you know, the rioting and that's what's getting covered, and you see sort of the you know, our politicians referring to the people who are doing the rioting as thugs. It just, you know, it sort of exacerbates this coarseness of our dialogue that's already out there, and it, you know, takes us away from, as you were saying, addressing sort of the real issues. There was so much more coverage of the, you know, the riots and the destruction of property than there was conversations about, okay, but what are these peaceful demonstrations and what are they really angry about? Let's address some of those broader points.
And to that question, if I may, just very quickly, sure. Outside of the phrase union thugs, which goes back to the 1930s, and probably well before that, but, you know, I don't recall white people being referred to as thugs in the media in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I can give you dozens of examples of black people. Is the word thug the new N-word, the new acceptable way to say this?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think it's okay to criticize the coarseness, I think, of the dialogue because it's such an emotional issue. But it
then why aren't these cops who killed this young man being called thugs?
But it is okay to call a criminal a criminal. Rioting it's criminal activity, and so it's okay to be honest.
I don't disagree, but this is a word that is not criminal.
Yeah, you're missing the point. The point is, are the cops who killed Freddie Gray thugs for having killed him? That's also a criminal act.
We don't know until the investigation comes out.
Well, he's
an investigative report. Yes, that's true. Yes. But there are other instances in which there is criminal action being taken by folks of color in Baltimore. And those particular individuals are doing something that's excessively known as thuggery. So
what?
Generally speaking,
You mean over on Fox News?
Yeah, of course. So
no, I'm serious. I'm not. That's where I'm hearing all this stuff.
Well, generally speaking, when I grew up and there were people that were stealing and looting, my grandparents called them thugs. That's just what it is. So I don't think that's the new N-word, but that is something that people are doing. Folks that are peacefully protesting, they shouldn't be called thugs, plain and simple.
You know what's been one of the most heartening things in this throughout has actually been that it's been the people on the ground, when you've done these sort of man-on-the-street interviews, that have actually pushed back on some of this narrative and said, we want you to cover the real story. We want you to talk about that this goes broader than, you know, sort of these riots today. This goes, you know, this goes to sort of a broader lack of opportunity for people in these neighborhoods. One of the most interesting videos that kind of went viral was this interview that was done with members of the Bloods and the Crips who said, there's this story out there that we have joined together to, you know, to go against the cops. That's certainly not true. We want kids to get back in school. We want the violence to end. We've come together because of that. You know, it's been really interesting.
I was looking today to figure out where the hell did this story originate, because it's all over right-wing hate radio today. I mean, all of these guys are promoting it, and it's all over Fox News. The first story I could find was a Fox News story. I don't know if it actually originated there, but this is the kind of stuff that these guys throw out. And, you know, and they were quoting unnamed sources in the Baltimore Police Department, and, you know, the Baltimore Police Department saying, no, we didn't know.
One said social media. That's how the Bloods and Crips, they came together and said, hey, this was being put out on social media.
No.
There are a lot of positive stories that have come out of Baltimore. You saw people that were lined up in front of the police creating a chain as a community to show, hey, you will not attack the police. We're going to defend the police. You've seen people clean up the CVS and the streets around. So there's a lot of positive stories, and you see that being covered by the mainstream media, as well as on social networks. But when you think about damage and violence and riots, what is the media going to cover? Are they going to cover the peaceful protests, or are they going to cover
I get the if it bleeds, it leads nature of media, and you know, that's a whole other rant about the destruction of American media over the last 40 years. But the issue of when we start talking about cleaning up after the riots, when we start talking about the riots, when we start talking about the Mom of the Year, any of this stuff, it takes us away from talking about the fact that at least once a week, and it seems like 3-4 times a week in many cases, unarmed young black men in the United States are being killed by white police officers.
And I agree.
And we got a hell of a problem.
Well, no, there's no question about that, and I'm thankful for people like Attorney Benjamin Crump, who's been leading the effort for police reform, and he's doing a great job, and he's not race baiting. He's really out there making things happen. I think that it goes beyond having a black mayor and a black police
that's
superintendent.
That's just the
because
system.
that's what we have in Baltimore. I think it's more institutionalized than that. So for this to actually happen, and I think it's going on now, we're having legitimate conversations with the governor about putting together some reforms to pass some laws that would prevent this kind of thing from happening.
You mean the governor who took a swipe at the mayor saying, well, she finally called me. Oh, well, anyway, let's move along. The Supreme Court heard arguments today in a case that will determine how Oklahoma will execute its death row inmates. The case was brought forward by 3 Oklahoma inmates who claim that one of the 3 injections used in Oklahoma's lethal injection process does not actually adequately sedate the prisoner. The prisoners claim that use of the drug in the lethal injections amounts to cruel and unusual punishment, which would amount to a violation of the 8th Amendment, these 8th Amendment rights. And this is Clayton Lockett, the guy who died writhing on the chair screaming, or on the strap of the table. Isn't the real issue here the death penalty, not how we administer it?
Yeah, could not agree more. Could not agree more. And I'm going to be the good news police tonight and say that the fact is that Oklahoma is an outlier, and increasingly so. We see that something like 80% of executions take place in 3 or 4 different states, and you can name them. It's Oklahoma, it's Missouri, it's obviously Texas, it's it's Florida. Florida, right, and Ohio to some degree as well. But the truth is that many states have already outlawed the death penalty. There's 18 states that have, and if you look at it's basically about half states that have effectively outlawed the death penalty because they still have it in the books but haven't used it in more than 5 years.
We have just 1 minute left. I'd like each one of you to
There's some legitimate questions being raised about this, but the truth of the matter is, if you do eliminate the death penalty, then you're going to have a situation whereas you have people who have been sentenced for life and there are countless dollars being used, government funding being used to keep those people alive, clothed, housed, fed.
That's
an issue.
Actually, it's cheaper to keep somebody alive for 40 years than it is to do the whole death penalty thing with all the lawyers.
Show me the statistics.
The unfortunate reality, whether liberals like it or not, is that the vast majority of Americans support the death penalty, and I think the hardest job the Supreme Court has is making sure that
the Catholic Church is officially opposed to the death penalty.
That's the Catholic Church, but
most of your Protestant
every poll that's taken, the American public overwhelmingly supports the death penalty.
It's not overwhelming. It's support for it is sort of like a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's not something that as we just said, half the states even have the death penalty, right? Look at the Boston bomber case. If ever there was this perfect situation for somebody to support the death penalty, it would be that. His guilt is without question, et cetera, and yet only something like 20% of Massachusetts people actually want the death penalty for him.
More of tonight's Big Picture Rumble after the break.